Hello, everyone. Today's podcast episode is a very interesting one, if I do say so myself. Today, we're going to be talking about the Suez Crisis, which many of you may not know, but we will tell you what it is. And what if the Korean War went nuclear? This was actually it was a possible scenario. It's not outrageous per se, as it was suggested, actually, and we will discuss this. But first, one of our hosts was not able to come, so we had to replace him with a guest. I would like to introduce Akash.
Hello, everyone. My name is Akash, and I'll be your guest for today.
So, timestamps are going to be in the description for the Suez Crisis and the Korean War. So first, we're going to talk about the Korean War. The Korean War was a kind of like a proxy war in the Cold War. The Cold War was this like information and influence war between the United States and the Soviet Union. No open conflict actually broke out between the two major powers. So the Korean War was one of these proxy wars. It was basically communist North Korea went to attack a democratic South Korea because they wanted to unify the country. As a result, the United States got involved to back the South Koreans. And this resulted in a Korean War that technically still has not ended to this day. So, South Korea, they weren't necessarily democratic. That was my mistake. They were anti-communist, and that was a big thing for America. So, Douglas MacArthur, he was one of the major generals in the Second World War, and he helped us win the Asian conflict. He actually suggested that we use the nuclear weapons on the Chinese-North Korean border because Chinese troops had entered into North Korea because they were fearing their sovereignty with American troops so close. So Douglas MacArthur suggested that we nuke the entire border so it's uncrossable. So today we're going to be talking what would happen if that happened. So Ty, do you want to start off?
Sure. So if America was going to go nuclear, either Truman has to get pressured from Douglas MacArthur or Congress has to pressure Truman to agree with the nuclear option. Because we know that Truman did not like his nuclear option and wanted to keep a very Cold War and not make a hot war. And hot war is basically World War III, which is nuclear war. But Douglas MacArthur did not like that. He wanted to nuke China, so he did not want to lose the war. And we all know that Douglas MacArthur got fired from Truman. But in this scenario, Truman either gets pressured by Congress or Douglas MacArthur to agree with the nuclear option. And Douglas MacArthur should use 50 nukes as that's how much he wanted. That's how much he asked for Truman. And he used those 50 nukes to nuke the border of China and North Korea, which is Manchuria/North Korean lands. And he'll use that so he stops Chinese soldiers to cross the border. And if they try to, a lot of soldiers and equipment will get destroyed or die. So, Akash, do you want to continue with this?
Yeah, I'll talk. So if Truman had actually gave Douglas MacArthur the ability to nuke the border, that would have been an easy win for America. But at the same time, it would have showed the entire world how America would literally destroy everything just to win a small foreign war. This would definitely shock the entire world because this war, that wasn't a big thing. And if America would drop nukes on that, then it shows everyone. And it would definitely shock the entire UN.
Okay, I'll talk now. So by dropping nukes on a small proxy war, as Akash said, they're just showing the world that America will do anything to win a small petty conflict. I know it's had some implications, but to be honest, on the scale of things, it's not really a major conflict as World War II or the Great War. If nukes were used in that, it makes more sense than in this. So this also, one of the possible scenarios is that the Soviet Union's hey, America used nukes for their interest. Well, my interest in Eastern Europe and Asia, you know what? I'm going to drop nukes too now to get my way. So in this conflict, we are most likely going to get devastated with World War III, as America and Soviet Union are both dropping nukes to get what they want. And eventually their interests are going to conflict. Something's going to happen, and we'll probably be dead with nuclear winter.
Yeah,
That's how I would
exactly.
say.
If America would drop their nukes on like a small foreign country, all right? Now imagine what America would do to like somebody, their mortal enemies, such as Russia or China. This would definitely lead to lots of conflict. Maybe, for example, Russia or China could make an alliance and then take over America. Lots of things bad could have happened if America had nuked Korea over this small, or China over this small thing.
I totally agree with you, Akash. And like that one scenario, if America nukes North Korea, the ideology around nuclear weapons will have changed. And like the ideology in the Soviet Union and America says we can use nuclear weapons in any country to win wars. And sometimes they can use it on military bases or in sea bases, or sometimes even civilian cities. In our reality, when neither side nuked each other or nuked in any war, caused a very peaceful treaty, like an unspoken treaty. But if America nuked China, the China-North Korean border, ideologies would have changed around nuclear weapons, and us people, like if we were in 2020 right now, would view nuclear weapons differently.
Yes, I agree. Because from the modern perspective, we think this is absolute suicidal. But the Korean War was in the early 50s. The nuclear war the bomb was in its early infancy. Like, it did not really know what they were talking about. It was too small, and there wasn't enough for mutually assured destruction, which is actually that policy could prevent a nuclear war on many occurrences in our timeline. So yeah, as Tej was saying, they don't really know about the bomb, like our time period. So by using the bomb on Korea, the United States just kind of eventually resulted in World War III. Either immediately after, with the bombings of the North Korean-Chinese border, the Chinese could have teamed up the Soviets and they could have escalated it into a full-out war, or it could have been over a long, long time where the United States and Soviet Union were both dropping bombs to gain their interests, and eventually leading into a war that way. Either way, both would result in nuclear war. So now, Akash, you want to introduce our next topic?
This episode is sponsored by Anchor, a free podcast host.
A podcast host is a website that allows you to upload your episodes and distribute. And what makes Anchor special is that it distributes for you, ladies and gentlemen. As soon as you click submit for your podcast, Anchor automatically sends it to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many other platforms.
Best of all, you can make money with no minimum listenership.
It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place, including on your phone.
Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
All right, our next topic is going to be the Suez Crisis. And yeah, Rohan, you want to explain about it?
Sure. So the Suez Crisis in our timeline happened when the Egyptian government, who had recently become decolonized by the British Empire, decides to nationalize the Suez Canal. So the Suez Canal basically was the heartline of the British Empire, as it allowed Britain to quickly go to their colonies all across the world. So by nationalizing the Suez Canal, the Egyptians can tax it. They can make money from it. So now when British ships want to go through it, they had to pay to the Egyptian government. And on top of that, at this time, Egypt did not like Israel very well. So they could block Israeli traffic too. So the Suez Canal was built under British and French investors, so it's technically like between the two nations. So with this nationalization, they just lost their investment. So this results in actually Israel, France, and Britain teaming up together to go to war with Egypt and to take the Suez Canal. And the best way they devise this is to depose the current leader, President Gamal Abdel Nasser. I think I might have said that wrong, my bad if I did. So they first tried appeasement, but that did not work. And this resulted in the French and British invasions and the Israeli invasions. However, in our timeline, they backed down because of international pressure. Like the United States, they didn't really care. as much, but they were angry about the fact that they were not consulted before this. So they threatened huge economic sanctions, which would crumble the two nations' economy, Britain and France, as they were still very reliant on American loans after the aftermath of the Second World War. And Israel, it was definitely threatened by the United States, but they weren't as close back then as they are now. Also, the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, also threatened to nuke Western Europe. So now in this timeline, we're going to look at what if the three nations, Israel, France, and England did not back down. So my theory is that Nikita Khrushchev, he would have not dropped the bomb. I think he was bluffing. So I think, he would have bluffed, which could have caused huge issues in the Soviet Union. Like, oh, why didn't you were bluffing and stuff. You're showing that the Soviet Union is too weak to the West. And I think the US would have done some steep financial things that would have hurt the British economy. But the Suez Crisis, most historians believe, basically ended colonization around the world. Like, it was slowly going away, but the Suez Crisis made it happen in a few years. So if it went in turn of favor for the British and French, they could have actually put down independence movements all around their different nations. Like India and Pakistan were long gone by then, but I'm talking about Algeria, Morocco, Kenya. And they could have stayed still under the colonial powers. And they could have, England and France, they could have also become a third superpower in this Cold War. Because in the Cold War right now, it was the West, or democracy, and communism, the Soviet Union, the United States. With the Suez Crisis, it just showed the British and French were no longer superpowers. But if it went in their way, they could have become the third superpower, or imperialism, or colonialism, whichever one you want to call it. So this would have definitely changed the Cold War law, because no longer could they get pushed by the United States, because now they were as strong too. They were on the superpower. So, Tad, you want to talk about what they would do?
Yes. So if Britain, France, and Israel went full-on invasion on the Republic of Egypt, right? They will have revised their Operation Musketeer, which is an operation of invading Egypt. So in our reality, France and Britain sent paratroopers, and British sent Marines to occupy the Suez Canal, right? And then Israel sent troops to occupy Sinai. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but yeah. So, but in this alternate scenario, Britain and France will quickly send troops where their paratroops and Marines landed and try to go from the Suez Canal into the capital. And there'll obviously be battles. Like, there could be a battle during the border between the Suez Canal and the rest of Egypt. There could be a battle in Alexandria, which was a city that Britain wanted. And there could be a battle in the capital in Cairo. But after all of these battles, obviously we can expect for Britain and France to win. So in this scenario, Britain and France will occupy Egypt. So Israel will occupy Sinai, and France and British will occupy the rest of Egypt, like Alexandria, Cairo, and the Suez Canal. And obviously there's a lot of international pressure, like Rolls-Royce said, and obviously I think that Soviet Union was bluffing, and I think the party knew about that, and they just won't do anything. And America will either try to pressure to release Egypt or support Britain. So, Rolls-Royce, what do you think? Will America change their mind?
I think, honestly, America would be really pissed, but at this point, they can't do anything. Because now, not only is the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, but there's no third superpower. As I said, England and France. But I think also the West Germany, because at this point, West Germany was no longer occupied by the Allies. It was its own nation. I think they would form with Britain and France and form like this whole European pact kind of in this Cold War. So now it's kind of a three-way Cold War, except obviously the British and the Americans are more friendly to the Americans and the Soviets, obviously. But I think that colonialism would last a long more time, and the British Empire would not have fallen as it did in our timeline. And also, I feel like this event actually could have resulted in a lot of issues for the Soviet Union. Like, some people might say civil war, but I would say rebellions here and there because by Khrushchev not dropping the bomb, the party thinks he's weak, right? So they're going to try to depose him. So Khrushchev, he might have had the support of the military or the people. So it could have resulted in rebellions, maybe a small civil war here and there. But I think just rebellions between Stalinists and Nikita Khrushchevs. Because Stalinists, obviously, they would have dropped the bomb. And while this whole internal chaos is happening, the Soviet Union's influence in Eastern Europe is also having issues. I would say this actually is an opportunity for both Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, maybe, to rise up and to try to overthrow their Soviet influence, their Soviet strength per se, and become free nations again. So by 1962, the political climate was a lot different because now Europe is, as I've been saying, Europe is one of the strongest powers in the world, and the US and the Soviet Union are also a lot less powerful. And yeah, I think Eastern Europe would have fallen apart from the Soviet influence. The Soviet Union might have even fell apart or might have survived. That's something you can't necessarily tell, per se. But I think this would have resulted in the Soviet Union collapsing. Tej, you want to contribute anything else?
Okay, yes. So you said this Egyptian crisis will cause the Soviet Union fall. I will say there will definitely be debates and argument inside the party of Stalinists and Khrushchevs, and I don't think the Soviet Union will fall, but one side will take in control. Either Khrushchev will take power, or either some loyal Stalinist or other ideology of communism will overthrow Khrushchev. And this will obviously cause Eastern European revolutions to uprise. The question is, will they get their freedom or not? And it really depends on the scenario. I think it's unlikely, but maybe they could. Maybe one country strategically found their way to get their freedom. Who knows? So I want to talk about the colonialism of France and Britain and how their power will affect the world. So now Britain and France have shown the USSR and USA that they have some power in foreign influences. And France will obviously show some oppression in their colonies. The Algerian War, for instance, will gain less support among Algerians to fight against the French. Britain will still get its foreign influence, and the people will start liking British Empire instead of opposing it. And Egypt will get divided eventually. I think France may either get Alexandria, or British will either get Alexandria, or either France gets Caria, or British gets either Caria. But they will eventually divide up Egypt and occupy those lands, and Israel will keep Sinai. And this will cause Britain and France to still keep their great power over the world and their colonialism influence. They obviously lost it over hundreds of years, but they'll still, instead of losing, but they'll delay the progress, I'll say. They'll eventually release these colonies, but they will delay the progress due to this war. And I want to talk about Israel too. And I still think that the 6-Day War, which happens after the Suez Crisis Canal, will still happen. It's just the only difference is Israel will have Sinai, and Israel, instead of fighting Egypt, will fight the other countries. And I don't know who's going to come out top of this, but I would say Israel will come out top because of its allies, but who knows? So does anyone want to contribute to this conversation or end it?
So you talked about the 6-Day War. So the 6-Day War in our time happened, I think, in the 60s. So yeah, I think it would happen still, but I think it happened a lot sooner, in 57 probably. So the crisis happened in 56. So I think what happened in 57, as Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, they were really scared of Israel as it was increasing in power by annexing the Sinai Peninsula. It helped take over Egypt. So they would attempt to go to war with Israel. However, it would not really work well as they don't have the backing of Egypt, and Egypt was probably had the best economy and best military of all the other countries. So Israel would just win the war and annex more territory. And another thing is that modernization would continue to happen in Israel. And now instead of the United States slowly helping, it'd be Britain and France helping their allies out. So I want to talk about the Middle East and North Africa because in 1954, Algerians were actually fighting for their independence against the French Empire. However, with the victory of the Suez War, the Algerian independence movement actually, I feel like it might lose supporters because they're seeing it's hopeless because the empire is here to stay. So the independence war would be crushed, and independence movements throughout the world would be crushed because of this event. Because with this event, in our timeline, it just showed to the British and French public that they were no longer strong. This is a public humiliation, that they cannot keep their empires. But if the Suez Crisis was good for them, it would show to the public that they can keep their empires, they can maintain it. So let's go to the Middle East. So because of Egypt actually being gone, the United Kingdom would be more involved in the Baghdad Pact. Because the Baghdad Pact was like a pact, alliance, faction, or economic pact between Turkey, Iraq, Britain, Pakistan, and Iran. And in Baghdad, the king Faisal II, who was the king of Iraq, actually approved the removal of Nasser. And as a result, Iraq actually modernized with the support of the British government. However, obviously, it was Arab nationalists resenting, trying to get rid of the British influence, and they also attempted to plan a coup and stuff. So this might have actually resulted in. Sorry, let me formulate a word. This might have resulted in the unification of Iraq and Jordan as a last ditch effort to help their two countries, because Jordan was economically constrained with the defeat by Israel, and Iraq was having internal conflict. So by the two of them to combine, the British could help them both with their economic aid. And they were both pro-British. Economic aid that can help solve their internal struggles and all their issues. Yeah. So, Kaj, you want to talk about Syria?
Okay. So Rohan was talking about Middle East countries like Iraq and relationship with Britain, right? I'm going to talk about a very specific country called Syria. So around the 1957 and 1958, Syria had a very corrupt government, and it was in the verge of collapse and desperation. So in our reality, Syria annexed Lebanon to create the Republic of Greater Syria. I still think Syria will still do this. They will unite with Lebanon to form the Republic of Greater Syria. The thing is, how is this unification going to affect the relationship with Britain and France? So remember, Syria used to be a colony from France. So would France agree with this nationalism, this Greater Republic? I don't think France will like this, and I think with this corrupted government, they will try to influence they'll use their power to influence Syrian politics. So instead of France decreasing their power, they'll try to increase their power, delaying their colonialism, but find a new way to get power by influencing Middle Eastern politics, because eventually their colonies will go away and they won't have control of those. So they'll need to find a way to get their power. So obviously, instead of trying to declare war on Syria, they'll just try to influence in Syrian politics. So that's the only great big difference in Syria than in our reality and in this scenario. So Akash, do you want to talk about Russia and Hungarian-Polish war, about your theory?
Yeah, sure. Rohan briefly went over it. I'm just going to expand on it a little bit. So if all this happened, all right, there would definitely be a second Russian civil war between the Stalinists and the anti-Stalinists, with the leaders such as Nikita Khrushchev. After making this threat to the tripartite allies and failing to come through, Khrushchev would get voted out of the office, and then he would be replaced by Nikolai Bulganin. But obviously, nobody wants to give up their own power, and he would bring in his own military to kind of keep control of his power. This would then result in lots of fightings to go throughout Russia, mainly like Moscow and big cities. And within the people that were loyal to Stalinists and the people that were loyal to the anti-Stalinists. This would definitely increase the escalation of war. This, of course, with the civil wars going on in Russia, would definitely make other nations kind of rise up after seeing all this war. They can try to take advantage of it. One, if you could be Poland and Hungary, they could definitely take advantage of the conflicts in Russia. After the Hungarian Revolution, there would be many armed resistances and workers' council strikes that would happen in Hungary, which would definitely lead to a revolution. And there would be mobs swarming everything. And lots of Poland and Hungary could definitely have lots of revolutions and such, as they're probably going to take advantage over all the fighting's going on around.
Okay, so after the Civil War, Khrushchev probably would have won. But I'm going to talk about potential Soviet influence in the Middle East. Because in our timeline, it was influence between the Americans and the Soviets, obviously. The Americans are trying to be nice, and the Soviets are trying to be nice to each other, to their nation. So the Americans were friendly with Iran, and Iraq was hostile. And then with the revolution in 1972 or something like that, Iran became hostile to the United States and the Soviet Union, I think. And Iraq was better. But in this timeline, the British now also are involved. So the U.S. was actually trying to be friendly with Egypt so that way they could be the dominant power in the Middle East. But with this Egypt gone and it being replaced by these powerful British and French empires, the Soviet Union is probably worried now because they have to worry about two others, the British and French and the Americans. And I think in the Middle East, the British and French would have a much larger influence as they had colonies there, obviously. Syria used to be French. Iran, I think Iran used to give oil to the British. Kuwait used to be British. So I think that the Soviet Union would have a lot less influence in the Middle East than they did in our timeline. In fact, I don't even think the Afghan war would happen, actually. So maybe no 9/11 not 9/11, but no Taliban in Afghanistan taking control. Because what happens with the Afghan war is the Soviet Union went to war because they installed a communist government with their influence. And he was deposed, and they went to war. Then Americans gave weapons, and this eventually formed the Mujahideen. They fought back the Soviets. Then after that, there was some infighting, and then the Taliban took over, which obviously we know they hid Osama bin Laden, which resulted in the United States invading after the 9/11. However, with the Soviets not having much influence because of British and French, I don't think the Taliban would ever rise up because there would be no Afghan war between the Soviets and Afghanistan, obviously. Or it might have happened, but it might be more the Soviets trying to actually directly invade rather than to install their government back. And Britain and France would obviously get involved too. So yeah, I think we've discussed all major points. Let's conclude it off, boys.
So that will be the conclusion of the Suez Canal crisis and our theory of Britain and France getting more influence and power. And the Korean War, if America nuked Korea and they won the Korean War, but also caused this new ideology around nuclear weapons. And I think that wraps it up, boys. I'd like to thank Akash for being our guest and our replacement for our host. I liked your theory about the Soviet Union did have a civil war.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you guys for inviting me to the show.
Yeah, no problem.
If you guys want to hear more news about the podcast, go to our Twitter. It's called @BackAtThePast. Is that right?
Then Back to the Past P1.
And
we wouldn't mind constructive comments, like suggestions, like what we could do better on our Twitter, that'd be excellent.
Yes.
And if you know anyone that enjoys alternate history, please send them the podcast. It'd be very appreciated.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed our discussion. And remember, suggestions and comments are welcome. Like suggestion for ideas or like constructive comments about what we can do better, what we should not do, our style. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to us. Bye.
Fine.